Cool, let's take a look at where we left off. If I press play here, and you can see we now have like essentially we have these constantly these hurdles spawning, which is pretty awesome. We have the cake coming at us, things like that. When my character runs into these hurdles, they don't he doesn't trip or do anything. We'll work on that later. Just kind of making some notes. But something I'd like to do is maybe double up the hurdles on some lanes. And so what I'd like is maybe two hurdles next to each other, not three, because then we're blocking everything, and then that'll take points off. So, like the way I'm viewing this game is sort of maybe we'll have a health bar where if the health goes down, your player loses the match. You can win if you survive based on time. We could speed up the game. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and this is a great way of thinking, a great exercise rather for game design. So inside of our, let's see here, we have the spawn hurdle method, and I'm just going to just go ahead and delete this update for now. And let's go ahead and just say, okay, what do I want to do here? Well, I'd like to spawn, more than one hurdle. So I want it to be roughly between like 0 to 3, 0 being no hurdle spawn, and then because we already have a hurdle that automatically spawns. So let's make it integer and just call this hurdle to spawn. And I'm going to make that equal to random dot range, and then the range that we're going to go is 0 to 3. And so anywhere in between there, so this will really just kind of mostly give us it'll give us like 2 to 3 hurdles, or really 1 to 2 hurdles, because it's between 0 and 3. So it's going to be very rare that we're going to have, we'll have 0 hurdles, will be no hurdles, then 3. So let's just see how this looks. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use a list, and this list is going to store essentially which lane is available in order to spawn the hurdles, because we don't want to spawn a hurdle on top of another hurdle. All right, so let's break down this line of code. So we're saying that we want to create this list, and we're going to call it available lanes, and it can store integer values, and it's a new list, and all it's holding now are the numbers 0, 1, and 2. All right, now something else I want to do is we're going to, another safeguard is let's add a for loop here. I'm just going to hit tab on that. And I'm going to grab my hurdles to spawn here, which remember is between a range of 0 to 3. And what's going to happen is this code, every time one of these hurdles appears in our scene or spawns in our scene, what it's going to do is it's going to call this spawn hurdle. So every time it appears, like it gets reactivated, it's going to play this call this spawn hurdle. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, we're going to run this for loop. Now, how many times does for loop run? Well, if hurdles to spawn is only storing the number 1 here, as long as I, which is 0, is less than 1, it's going to run the code inside of here 1 time. So we have anywhere from 0 to 3. This code may not run at all. It might run, whatever, between 0 to 3 times, whatever. So what I'm going to do is grab all of this code here from line 28 to 37. I'm going to hit Control X on that, and I'm going to paste that inside of this for loop. And because we kind of understand how this works, I'm just going to take my instantiation line just to kind of make this a little bit smaller and zoom out. Just kind of put that on its own, same thing here. Just kind of compress this a little bit and then space this out. And I mean, maybe for visibility for you guys, I'll leave that like that. And I'll space these out so you could see each line of code separately. So I'll save this. And now what will happen is, again, this for loop will run, and it'll only spawn as many hurdles, on the specific lane that are less than this range here. So if I save this, it should still run fine. Let's take a look. So there's 1 there. So we're still getting them pretty random. But I'd like to have like something like that where it's like you're having 2 sitting next to each other, things like that. Now I don't want them spawning on top of each other. So let's go ahead and integrate this list here. So remember, this random lane index is going to give us a range from 0 to lanes.length, right? And this, if you remember, lanes.length is essentially the, let's see, let's do F12 on this so I can show you how it goes directly to here. So we have an array here of lanes, and it's the length of this array. So it's minus 303. Well, now we don't really need this because we now have we can get a random lane index from the number of available lanes here. So we're just going to do available lanes dot count. So it's essentially doing something similar, but now what we're doing is it's just the length of this value here, which is these three elements here. So we're still getting a random lane index between 0 and 3 here. Now let's create a variable, and what this variable is going to do is store whatever the selected lane is. And just take a moment to think about this, right? How do we know what lane is selected? Well, we have this random lane index, right, which is this guy right here. And what it's currently storing is a number between 0 and then the total count, which is 3 of these. So what we can say is the lane that is selected, right? We're just making a variable here called selected lane. It's an integer. It's just going to store whatever the index is of that random lane. So we're going to say, okay, we're currently storing lane 1 in random lane index. And the way we're going to do that is, actually, let's grab our available lane, sorry, not our random lane index. And then what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to say the available lane is this random lane index here. So that way we know we always get a 0, 1, or 2. So let me run through that one more time. So if we look at the top here, this is just the list. All it's doing is storing 0, 1, or 2. We have another variable here, which is an integer called hurdles to spawn. And that's holding, again, same thing, a random number between 0 to 3. In our for loop here, this only loops a random number of times based on hurdles to spawn. So this could run 0 times, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Then we have this value here. Again, all it's doing is it's storing a random number, right, between 0 and the total number of elements in this list, which is 0, 1, or 2. And that's what available lanes.count does. Now we have a selected lane variable, and all we're doing is we're breaking it into the smallest possible thing that we need. So I want to make a variable that is selecting the current lane. So what this is I'm just using the available lanes, which is here, and then I'm going to use this value here, which is random lane index, which is just generating a random index number between 0 and 3 so that it gives me one of these, either lane 0, 1, or lane 2. And that's what the selected lane is doing. Now, how do we actually make sure that we're not spawning one of those hurdle game objects on top of the other ones? Well, what we can do is every time we spawn, like one of these hurdles or whatever, we can go into available lanes and use because remember, available lanes is a list. We can use remove at. And what we're going to do inside of here is we're just going to remove the lane index that was generated here. So what this is going to do is we pick a lane, right? It's stored inside the selected lane. And then once that selected lane is storing it, we're going to remove that lane index, which is we're going to remove it from here, 0, 1, or 2. And every time this keeps rerunning, it keeps adding it back into this spawn hurdle method. It'll keep adding 0, 1, or 2. So it's kind of redoing itself over and over again. But at least for the moment that ground piece is spawned, we remove that lane index. And then what happens is when we go to instantiate it, right, we won't be instantiating on top of each other. So if you look at our vector3 spawn position now, we're not looking at lane's random lane index now. We want to use the selected lane as our x value. All right, let's take a look at this. So some of the ground pieces, take a look, might not have any hurdles on them, and others might have. So like you can see here, there's some, like here we have 0. We've got 1 here. This one has 2. So this is kind of really adding a lot of dynamic gameplay to our game here. We've got our donut here. All right, cool. All right, so because I know that this is always going to be 3, right? Because we're doing hurdles to spawn. I'm going to change this 3 to lanes.length here. And that'll give us 0, 1, 2, right? These 3 elements. And what that does also is that safeguards it, where if we enter in a number like 5 and there's not 5 elements in there, we'll end up getting an error saying, hey, you're asking for more elements that are stored in there. So this adds sort of a safe, it adds a fail-safe in there. All right, so something else I want to do is I kind of want to put in a failsafe here because if hurdles to spawn or any of these other available lanes that count is less than or equal to 0, like we're going to get an error. So I'm just going to show you sort of a way to enter a failsafe into your code. So you can use an if statement here, and I'm just going to hit tab to put that in there. And I'm just going to write like, well, what am I worried about? Well, if available lanes dot count is less than or equal to 0, I'm just going to write the word break in here. Now what break does is, with a lowercase b, let me save this, is we're going to create this available lanes when it's called, and it's going to store this in there. Now, for some reason, if another piece of code or someone else goes in there and they change this hurdles to spawn to 0 or 10 or whatever, what's going to happen is, again, we want to just sort of break out of this. Actually, you know what? Sorry, this isn't going to work because we actually need it inside of our for loop here. There we go. So that's why we're getting that error, because available lanes here that count, we need to sort of run it through this, and that's why we're getting that little error to break, because there's nothing to break out of, and that's what this break keyword is used for. So we're breaking out of a for loop. So what's going to happen if our available lanes that count is less than or equal to 0? We'll just exit out of this for loop, and that's it. So that's a way of not crashing our game if somebody enters a value for the number of elements in our list. Right. Another way of doing this is if you always have only one argument in your for loop, you can actually get rid of these curly braces, and you can just write it like this as well, just kind of showing you how this works. Now, let me just show you why this break is important. So let's say we add, I'm going to save this, we put a 10 here. Now, we don't have, as long as I is less than 10, it'll actually spawn 3 elements here. But the problem is, anything over 10, if we don't have this in there, could crash our game. So I'm going to press play here, and what you'll notice is you'll have 3 hurdles across each area that we're running in. See that? And they're spaced out evenly. And what's happening is this failsafe here is stopping us from crashing. It's actually stopping our game from crashing because we have 10 elements here. And what it's doing is it's just saying, hey, available lanes.count is less than or equal to 0. Break out of this. So this is sort of our failsafe if if we hit a null or we hit something that's after this point that triggers a 0. If I have this line in here, I'll show you what that error looks like. Hopefully it doesn't crash anything. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C here. Open this up, and I'm going to press play here. You can see it says argument out of range in exception. Index was out of range, must be non-negative and less than the size of the collection. And the collection that they're talking about is this list here of items. So hopefully that was clear. And that's why this, again, I put this failsafe in here, is if this element, this 10 here, has changed. So I'm just going to hit Control-Z a couple times, add that back. And you might be thinking too, like, well, let me close this. You might be thinking too, like, okay, well, don't we have this hurdles to spawn here as a safeguard anyway? We do, but this is protecting your code against other people, not necessarily yourself. Or maybe you're tired one day and you decide to change this or whatever. And then you're like, oh yeah, I put this failsafe in case that works. Anyway, if you're not a programmer, sorry if that was a little bit of word salad. If you are an engineer, I hope you take away that trick, or a game designer. Anyway,